Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Animal-Based Dad podcast. This is the show where between my guest interviews with subject matter experts and topic-specific deep dives, the aim is to arm you with actionable insights and information on how to prioritize your metabolic health and improve your overall health and well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Animal-Based Dad podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Plessis, and welcome to what is the opening episode of my deep dive series. So for everyone's benefit, I've decided to split my podcast into two separate series. So on a Monday, I release what is my guest interview series, where I'm having unscripted conversations with subject matter experts, doctors, researchers, scientists, health coaches, nutritionists, professionals within the health and wellness space, in other words, and discussing with them what metabolic health means to them, the different angles and aspects that they have, their particular niche, and gleaning from them bits of information that you as the audience can take away and implement in your own lives. So an informative session, as it were, but at quite a high level. We don't really go into too much detail because there's only so much detail you can go into in an hour and a half worth of conversation. And so that led me to decide to create the second series, which I release on Thursdays, which is what I'll call the deep dive series. And the purpose of this series is to get into the real finer detail of things, to really go down little rabbit holes and to unpack the nuance and have a very detailed discussion on a particular topic. And so, two separate series, guest interviews on a Monday, topic-specific deep dives on a Thursday. This is the opening episode of the topic-specific deep dives, and I've got some very good stuff lined up to come, and we'll get on to that in a minute. But I wanted to use the first episode to talk about my book, Conquering King's Stomach. I'd initially planned to do a short series, 3 or 4 episodes discussing the book. But the more I thought about that, the more I thought, you know what, one episode is probably enough to talk to you about why I've written the book, how I came to that decision, what my aim for the book is, what I want to achieve, and go into sort of what I've intended it for. And then those who find that compelling, those who would like to make use of it, whether for themselves, for a loved one, for a client, whoever, available for purchase via Amazon. And hopefully it does a good enough job at taking the past 7 years of learning that I've done in my own health journey and condensing it into something practical that you can use to implement appropriate nutritional lifestyle change in your own lives. So I guess the best starting point is a bit of a background on me. Now, I won't go into the full detail. I did a very detailed background on myself and how I got into all of this when I was interviewed by the fantastic Martin Gillespie on his podcast called Metabolic Wellbeing Without the BS. I will link that episode in the description for this one for anyone who wants to see that more detailed overview of my background and how I got into this. But if I was to put it into broad strokes for the purpose of this, this episode is brought to you thanks to my work as a Zinzino independent partner. To find out more about Zinzino's product offering within test-based personalized nutrition, or to find out about how to join as an independent partner yourself and build a revenue stream in helping others take the guesswork out of their personal health journeys, please stay tuned because I'll be sharing information later in this episode. I have always been a fairly active guy. I've had times in my life where I wasn't so active, usually after a big injury. I've done my left knee in a few times, and I had spells of no activity after that, after big surgery. But generally speaking, being a very active guy, but I've always been the sort of guy who ate whatever the hell I wanted because I was always active enough to sort of get away with that. And I used to sort of believe that if I put in the physical effort, it didn't matter what I ate. It was absolutely fine. And that was true through my teens, seemed true. Seemed true enough through my 20s. If I was active, it was absolutely fine. Towards the latter half of my 20s, that started to not be so true. And then certainly into my early 30s, it was quite obvious that that was not true anymore. Stayed active in the gym 4 or 5 days a week, thrashing myself in the gym. Strong, fairly muscular, but I was getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And so I looked like a rugby prop. If you cast your mind back, for those who are old enough to, like the mid-90s, provincial rugby kind of thing. Like, yeah, I was equally broad as I was round. And yeah, it just my metabolic health was failing. I wasn't intending to get fatter. It disturbed me. And I couldn't explain it. And it seemed no matter how much I tried to ramp up the exercise, it didn't really counterbalance. I'd always been someone who ate to satiety. And I love food. I love food very, very much. So the thought of having to count calories and restrict myself was scary enough that I jumped online, desperate to find an alternative. And thankfully, I did that. Thankfully, I was scared enough of having to bloody walk away from a meal hungry. Because let's be honest, like it's one thing to experience hunger, and I think everyone should experience hunger on a daily basis, true physiological hunger. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I think that that should be the case before you eat something. I think I certainly used to, and I think most people, if they're honest with themselves, have been conditioned to eat to avoid hunger. So you eat at set times of the day, regardless of whether you're hungry or not. You just eat because it's that particular time of day, whether that's breakfast in the morning, lunch, or dinner. You eat because you're supposed to eat at that time, whether you're hungry or not. That's certainly how I was. And the thing that I didn't want to do was to eat, but have to stop myself before I felt satiated and to walk away from that meal, still feeling hungry, feeling unsatisfied, but walking away for the sake of remaining at or below a certain number. Just that whole approach doesn't sit right with me. I think that you should not eat until you're actually hungry, truly physiologically hungry. And then you should eat, and you should eat your fill. Eat until you're satiated, and then stop eating. And then not eat again until you're actually physiologically hungry again. Wild concept, I know, but it's an ancestrally appropriate approach to eating. You have built into you hormone that signal hunger and satiety, leptin and ghrelin. Your body has stretch receptors in your stomach to tell when you've had a certain volume of food. And those stretch receptors, again, will, via signaling, tell you that you're full, stop eating. You have these things built into you because you're supposed to not eat until your body's telling you you need to eat. And then you eat until your body tells you you've had enough. And then you stop. You were not designed, you're not adapted to sit and work out in a calculator how many calories you should be consuming. That's not how your body uses nutrition. Your body doesn't recognize a calorie. Your body doesn't use a calorie. Your body uses nutrition to derive energy and to sustain and fulfill chemical processes, cascades of chemical processes involved in the functioning of your cells. But we're going down a slight rabbit hole here, and I'll pull myself back and get myself back on track. So I was so scared and not willing to do the whole calories in, calories out thing that I started looking around, and I stumbled across the ketogenic diet. I'd never heard of it before, didn't know what it was about, but thought to myself in looking at the detail and looking at what was laid out in front of me, and thought to myself, you know what, that sounds good. I can try that. It's telling me I can eat fatty meats. I can eat until I'm full, and I have to just ditch the carbs. If I have to choose between my sort of macros, protein and fat are going to win every time. Like carbs, yeah, carbs are great. Carbs are tasty, all that, but they're certainly not good enough to warrant losing out on either protein or fat. So I decided to forego those, give a ketogenic diet a 3-month trial. And I settled on the 3-month number because I figured 90 days was a good enough period of time to see whether there's any real changes or not. From the bit of reading I'd done in convincing myself that I wanted to give the ketogenic diet a try, I had come across literature suggesting that there's a sort of 4 to 6 week window where people go through an adaptation phase. People talk about like keto flu and stuff like that, where you can feel a little bit horrid. So I was aware that there is this phase that you go through when your body adjusts from using carbs as a primary source of fuel to using fats as the primary source of fuel. And I didn't want to cut my experiment short within that period. I wanted to see it through, get to the other side, and give it another sort of 3 to 4 weeks to see what the changes would be. And so I did that. And this was around about April, May, I think, 2018. So a while back now. And it was absolutely phenomenal. Lost a lot of weight, but more importantly, I felt better than I'd felt in years. The difference it made to how I feel and how I function was astounding. Mental clarity, stable energy. My cravings started to subside. Now I'm a recovering alcoholic, so I know what addiction is. And I used to binge eat, and I still do. Like if I allow myself, let's use ice cream as an example. If I'm disciplined and then I come to the day and I go, you know what, stuff it. Like today I'm gonna have ice cream. Like I can tell myself with every intention in the world that I'm going to have 2 or 3 scoops out of the tub of ice cream and limit myself to that. There's not a flipping hope, not a snowball's hope in hell. I will try that. I genuinely will. I'll try that. And it'll hit those dopamine feedback loops. And the compulsion that comes to have all the ice cream is akin to the compulsion I feel if I have an alcoholic beverage, that compulsion to have more, because it feels great. Like you get that endorphin boost, that mood elevation, that lift. So you feel good for it. And that feedback loop in the brain, it's just like more. So I've had this all my life. And if I eat the wrong things, if I eat hyperpalatable confectionery, like sugary type stuff, man, that I'll go nuts and I will eat it all. I'll binge eat it all, and I'll feel disgusting about it and want to beat myself up about it, and it won't be that great, but it's there. Like, whether I like it or not, that's the reality. That's how my brain is wired. And hopefully some of the audience listening to this can relate, because I appreciate not everyone's like that, but I certainly am. Binge eating is a problem. But the thing that I noticed was that you can't binge eat if you're avoiding hyperpalatable foods. And that was profound to me. It really was, because I'm someone who's struggled with binge eating, never labeled it as binge eating. I was always hungry or had a big appetite, or so on and so forth. I'd always eaten like a horse, 3, 4, 5 times the portions of normal human being. um, and giving the ketogenic diet a try, changed quite dramatically, because something phenomenal happens when you eat food that isn't laced with stuff that bypasses your hunger and satiety hormone system. You can sit and eat. It's a simple experiment. Dr. Anthony Chaffee detailed this out the first time I heard it, so I gave it a try. Bang on the money. Dead easy to do. So I'll just explain the experiment, and you can do it for yourself at home if you like. Go out and buy yourself a kg to a kg and a half of ribeye steak. So a good amount of ribeye. If you think you walk into the supermarket, the average ribeye that's laid out there is maybe 340 grams, 350 grams. So if we're talking about a kg worth of ribeye, you're talking about a fair amount of ribeye. It's not a small amount of ribeye. It's significant. Get yourself that ribeye. Fast for a day. Don't eat breakfast. Don't eat lunch. Carry on about your day like normal. Build up a good amount of hunger for that evening. Like, be ravenous, in other words. Cook that ribeye. Fry it up in just butter with just a bit of salt. That's it. Right? Nothing else. No spice combinations, no rubs, no sauces, no nothing. Just butter, salt, ribeye. Bog standard. When you first bite into that ribeye, it'll be one of the most delicious things you've ever tasted in your life. It'll be absolutely scrumdiddlyumptious, and you will love it. You will savor every bite. It'll be beautiful. Remember, you fasted all day. You are probably physiologically hungry by that evening. And you're tucking into a gorgeous piece of meat with just a bit of butter and salt. Nothing there to adulterate it, nothing there to detract from the flavor of the meat itself. And it will be delicious. It'll be absolutely delectable. And you will eat and eat and eat. And there will come a point, and for everyone, it's going to be slightly different where that point hits, because it's going to depend on the size of you. It's going to depend on how active or inactive you've been. There's various factors that are going to determine when this point hits, but there will come a point where that stops tasting good. It physically stops tasting good. It starts to not taste that great. Nothing's changed with the steak. The steak is still the same steak. It's the same steak cooked in butter and salt that you were absolutely savoring 5 minutes ago. The thing that has changed is your body is now recognizing that you've had your fill, and it is releasing your satiety hormone. And that satiety hormone is telling you you've had enough, you need to stop. And the way it tells you that is you start to not enjoy what you're trying to shove down your throat. Now, you can choose to ignore that, and you can choose to continue muscling that steak down until your plate's clear. But it's going to be exactly that. You're going to be muscling that steak down. You're going to be hating every second of it. It's going to be a labor to try and force yourself to eat that. And you'll probably end up making yourself nauseous and sick anyway. Right? So the satiety hormone response is actually quite strong when you haven't laced the stuff with something that overrides that system. Easy way to demonstrate that that's exactly how it works is when you've hit that point and you're now trying to muscle that stuff down, right? Your satiety hormone is there and it's telling you you've had enough, you don't need anymore, right? This is no longer tasting good. Go get yourself a sauce. Now, whether you're a ketchup man, a brown sauce man, whatever the case may be, go get yourself a hyper palatable sauce that usually means it's got a bit of sugar in it. Chuck the sauce on the steak. All of a sudden, you can eat a lot more with a lot less effort. Like suddenly, that's not hard to muscle down anymore. Suddenly, you have an appetite again. Suddenly, you can continue eating. The reason that is because that hyperpalatable sauce that you've just put on there is hitting a completely different hunger system in the brain. It's hitting your hedonic hunger system, which is a reward-based, a pleasure-based hunger system. And it's going, that is delicious. I want more of that. And so you completely override your what I'll call your physiological hunger, your hunger that is tied into your body's needs for energy and for essential nutrients. 2 minutes ago, when that steak was starting to not taste good, that was your body telling you, A, you've got enough energy, you don't need to eat more. B, you've got the essential nutrients that you need from that meal, you don't need to eat more. Now you're overriding that hunger system and you're getting into your hedonic hunger system, your binge eating hunger system, as I'll call it for the purposes of this conversation. And all of a sudden you can eat a lot more. That's how that system works. So for me, someone who has an issue with binge eating, if I eat something that triggers that hedonic hunger system, game over. I'll eat until there's nothing left. Like there will have to physically be nothing left before I'm able to sort of go, oh, fine, all right, I'll stop. If I try to force myself to stop and there's still some there, man, oh man, the compulsion to have more. And look, to make sure that I'm expressing the proper nuance here, it's not every single time, right? It's not 100% of the time. It's maybe 95% of the time. There are days where I can go, no, you know what, I'm not in the mood for that because I'm distracted with something else or something else is going on. But generally speaking, the overwhelming majority of the time, if it's hyperpalatable, I will smash it all. And that's a problem. But with the keto diet, that wasn't the case anymore. So I started to notice changes. I changed physically, but my behaviors changed. The way I viewed and used food changed. And it developed an absolute passion for wanting to learn about this. Why? Like I'm fairly analytically minded. I like to understand why things work. I don't like to just accept that's how it is. I want to understand why. Not with everything. It has to be something that interests me. But if it interests me, I want to understand the mechanisms of it. And so it led me down a voyage of discovery. And 7 years later, I published my first book on nutritional lifestyle change because I've come to the point of appreciating that it's not about diets. Diet in the traditional sense implies enforcing a restriction to meet a temporary goal or to achieve a temporary outcome. temporary because there's usually a time frame involved, and then going back to what was normal afterwards. So people who diet tend to yo-yo up and down with their weight. Through their periods of discipline, their weight will drop, and then through their periods of returning to normal, they'll pile all the weight back on again, and so they yo-yo up and down. And usually, what happens is over time, that results in metabolic dysfunction because they're actually damaging their body. So I've learned that it's not about diet, it's about lifestyle. And one of the things that I became acutely aware of in this whole journey was that the literature, remember that I'm quite analytically minded, so the science fascinates me. I want to understand the science. I want to learn the science. I want to unpack the science. I want to have a good idea about this. So I'm someone who goes looking for it. And the scientific literature on human nutrition is an absolute minefield of misinformation, disinformation, conflicting information. It's terrible, basically, completely and utterly terrible, confusing, and it's no wonder that the general population is as confused and bewildered by it as what we are. It's honestly, for example, it's common knowledge, as they say these days, that cancer causes red meat causes cancer. Apologies. Red meat causes cancer. Common knowledge, widely accepted. No, it doesn't. It actually genuinely does. There's not a single experimental trial that demonstrates meeting the criteria for informing cause and effect that cancer or red meat causes cancer. It's not a single one. What we have is a literature of epidemiological studies, which are observational by nature. So talking food questionnaires, you're talking observational stuff, asking people what they ate, assessing lifestyles, blah, blah, blah. Epidemiology, don't get me wrong, epidemiology is a legitimate scientific field and it's necessary, and it when used appropriately is fantastic. But what epidemiology should be doing, or the way to use it, is to gather observational data, which by default is weak, lower quality data, because you can't control for confounding factors. You can't isolate specific criteria to test whether those cause certain outcomes. You can't do it. You've always got confounding factors. You've always got things that interfere with and mean that you can't make cause and effect statements using epidemiology. No self-respecting scientist worth their salt will use epidemiology to inform cause and effect. What you do with epidemiology is inform hypotheses, which then need to be taken to experiment to be proven or disproven. That is the correct use of epidemiology. But we don't have that. What we have is ideologically driven institutes, groups, people who misrepresent epidemiology as being indicative of cause and effect. And there's a, forget the name of the phenomenon. But if you repeat something often enough, it starts to become accepted as truth, even though it's completely false. It's a weird phenomenon in human sort of culture. And I wish I could remember the name for it, but that's effectively what's happened here. We've had a very loud, very vocal minority misrepresent the epidemiology for long enough, and there's been enough repetition that it's been accepted now. And the general uninformed person in the public, the average Joe has heard that thing said so many times by people of supposed authority that they just accept it. But it's not true. And anyone who's actually paying attention will confirm, yeah, it's not true. Red meat does not cause cancer. Whole red meat do not cause cancer. In fact, whole red meats are one of the most nutrient-dense, bioavailable superfoods to the human digestive system. Let that sink in for a minute. Red meat, whole red meat, is a superfood. It's not just protein. It's not just fat. It's actually packed with micronutrients. It's packed with essential vitamins and essential minerals that we need. So, yeah, red meat doesn't cause cancer. That's my bold statement. And so figuring out how much of a minefield this literature is, and we're talking about years here. We're talking about years where I've done keto, I've experienced keto, and I'm understanding the benefits that it's giving to me, and I'm trying to now learn why that's happening, so that I can articulate it to others when they're asking, like, what's changed? What have you done? How have you done that? And I keep coming up against these like hurdles of information that contradicts the stuff that I'm learning, and more importantly, the stuff that I'm experiencing. So I'm experiencing the best health of my life, but I'm encountering epidemiological evidence suggesting that it's killing me. It's leading me down the path to type 2 diabetes, leading me down the path to heart disease and issues like that. And the two didn't sit well. So many years through this journey and figuring things out for myself, getting connected with the right sort of people, learning from practitioners who use this in clinical settings and with their own clients and patients, seeing evidence-based information, I settled on the notion that we don't look at nutrition the right way. What I mean by that is, I think the best way to look at nutrition is the way that we would treat animals. And let me explain that for a second. We divide animals into trophic levels, which is to say carnivore, herbivore, omnivore, etc.
Hey everyone, I hope that you are enjoying the discussion so far. I apologize for interrupting the episode, but I just want to take a moment to talk to you about the work that I do with Zinzino. Zinzino are a brilliant Scandinavian biotech and life sciences firm. Their concept of test-based personalized nutrition is absolutely revolutionary, and they are the pioneers of test-based personalized nutrition. I use their products and solutions myself and my family. In fact, we use multiple of their products. And Zinzino has been instrumental in helping me identify that I was omega-3 deficient, horrendously so, and to get my omega-3 deficiency resolved. You see, their at-home tests give you the data and insights needed to inform your dietary strategy to see whether you have any key essential nutrient deficiencies or imbalances that need addressing. And where you do, they have targeted supplementation stacks that are personalized to you according to your age, sex, and body weight, which means they are most effective to get you back to optimal. This isn't about just avoiding deficiency. This is about getting you back to optimal, and that's a complete and utter game changer. So if you would like to know more, I have linked a short survey in the episode description. Complete the survey. It asks you some simple questions about your health goals and desires. It takes less than a minute to complete, And what I'll give you off the back of that is a personalized product recommendation out of Zinzino solution catalog, telling you which I think best suit your desires and needs and why. I'll then also personally reach out to you to see if there's any questions or queries that I can answer. Let me take the guesswork out of your health journey.
Based on the function of their digestive system. So what is their natural diet? What are they eating in the wild in their natural habitat? What does their digestive system cope with? What do they need to extract from their natural diet in order to thrive? Right? The function of their digestive system is the linchpin in all of that. Whatever they're eating, their digestive system must be able to A, handle it, and B, extract everything that they need in order to thrive from it. Okay. But we don't treat humans the same way. For some obscure reason, we seem to, like, no, that's for the animals. We don't do that for us. We fancy ourselves universal digesters. We're not. Human beings are not universal digesters. We're not even omnivores. In the truth of the matter, we're not. According to pure digestive function, we are not omnivores. And I can demonstrate this. If you were to go out into the wild, go get dropped in the middle of the wild somewhere, even if you had the knowledge, right? I'm not using an extreme hypothetical survival scenario of taking someone who knows nothing about bushcraft and dropping them in the wild and saying, oh, look how little stuff you can eat. No, not the case at all. Take even the most knowledgeable, well-trained bushcraft experts. Go drop them in the middle of bloody nowhere with no supplies, and they have to fend for themselves and survive. What can they eat? Right. You will be able to eat a significantly higher proportion of animals, including birds and reptiles and fish, than what you can plants. In the wild, there are very few, in fact, there's exceedingly few plants that the human digestive system can safely handle. Most plants, an insanely high percentage of plants, are highly toxic to us. You will make yourself sick if you try to eat them. Most animals are not. You can eat most animals, not all. There are some that are venomous. There are some that are poisonous. There are some that your system won't agree with. But it's not the way that people would imagine it. In modern life, you sort of imagine that we have this large amount of plants that are available to us and we can use as food, and then we've got this small amount of animal stuff that we can use. That's not the case. In the wild, it's the other way around. Your digestive system is that of a hypercarnivore. That's the trophic level assigned to the human animal. So what that means is your digestive system is geared towards a predominant reliance on animal meats, fats, and products, but you have the digestive flexibility to include some plants and fungi. And to be very specific, it's 70%. So 70% to 100% animal meats, fats, and products, 0% to 30% plants and fungi. That's the dietary range of a hypercarnivore in the wild, relying purely on that, on their digestive system. And I'll make a specification because I didn't do this a minute ago, but I just want to make it absolutely clear. When I say rely on your digestive system, I mean, you're relying purely on your digestive system, no cooking, right? Raw, wild, what do you eat to thrive? And if you're purely reliant on your digestive system, the same as any other animal would be, you're a hypercarnivore. That's what your digestive system is geared to deal with. Now, that leads us into the next segue, and there's a chapter in my book I call Gaming the System, which is we learned in our struggle to survive at the end of the Upper Pleistocene during the extinction event of the megafauna, where we faced survival pressures such that the megafauna were no longer available, which was mammoths and the sort, which were absolutely like a treasure trove of food. You got a mammoth, a village ate for a week, basically, right? When they died off at the end of the Upper Pleistocene, we faced having to rely on smaller and smaller prey animals, which were harder to catch and gave less reward. So there was a change in the economy there. There was a change in the amount of effort being put in versus the amount of reward and nutrition being extracted from. And we were forced to start to rely more and more on plants, and in fact, such that we turned to domesticating plants and animals because the hunter-gatherer approach was starting to become less and less sustainable, less and less achievable. And so mankind went through the shift into agriculture and was using our ingenuity, our genius, to say, well, we can make a more efficient way of producing food and we can figure out more efficient ways of avoiding starvation. It was a starvation avoidance mechanism, a starvation avoidance tactic to turn to agriculture. It was not because it was more optimal for thriving. It was because it was becoming harder and harder to survive. So we needed to make a change. Agriculture didn't boom when the megafauna were around. When the hunter-gatherer approach was yielding everything we needed, there was no pressure to turn to agriculture. Agriculture was not the superior way of doing things. That all changed when what was available to us as food changed. And so we learned to domesticate animals and plants. We learned to breed them. We learned to genetically alter them through selective breeding, especially plants, to make them more and more palatable, to make them more and more suitable for use as a food. Great example of this: kale, broccoli, cauliflower. What's the other one? Brussels sprouts. And there's another one, kohlrabi. I can't pronounce it, but there's 5 plants that I've listed there that are all derivatives of the wild mustard plant. They do not exist in the wild. You will not find wild broccoli out in the mountains. It doesn't exist. Man engineered the wild mustard plant, bred it selectively to form these other plants. Cauliflower doesn't exist out in the wild, right? Kale does not exist out in the wild. Brussels sprouts do not exist out in the wild, right? These are man-made crops. We have bred a plant, an ancestor plant, and we have bred different lines out of it, different gene lines out of it, to create different foods for ourselves. Again, we've used our genius, our ingenuity to create something to help us avoid starvation. So we learned how to domesticate and to genetically alter food to make it more usable as food. We learned how to cook, right? We learned how to cook food. Now, we learned how to cook food before we started domesticating things, but the cooking is really the thing that helps us unlock the plant kingdom. Because if you think about it, say for fruit, pretty much all plants kind of need to be cooked before you can actually extract decent nutrition out of them. That's not true of meat. You cook meat to neutralize pathogens. It's very helpful. Cooking does that. You don't cook meat to make it inherently digestible. There's a fundamental difference there. Your body will digest that meat fine. Yes, you may encounter pathogens, and pathogens will make you sick. That's why we have savagely low stomach acid, low pH, very strong stomach acid. It's evolutionarily speaking, is to deal with pathogens. As a little by the by, seeing as I've mentioned that, human beings, when, we're not interfering with ourselves, so we're not taking antacid tablets, we're not eating inappropriate things. So take a human being, fast that human being appropriately. The stomach acid level will be such that it is on par with vultures and other carrion animals, other scavenging animals, animals who rely on an extremely strong stomach acid to deal with pathogens because they're eating rotting meat. Right? That's how strong human stomach acid is, and that's worlds apart from every other omnivore and every other herbivore on the planet. Like completely different. So we have wildly strong stomach acid. We are made to eat meat. So your stomach acid should deal with the pathogens, but cooking is a good strategy to make sure that you've truly dealt with pathogens, because pathogens are nasty. And there's a evolutionary arms race on the go there between parasites and bacteria to sort of, they want to survive, we want to survive, and yeah. So cooking is a good idea to make meat safe to eat from a pathogen perspective, but meat is always inherently digestible. You'll digest and extract nutrition from that perfectly fine, raw. You don't have to cook it before you can digest it. Plants are a different story. The majority of plants have to be cooked, have to be appropriately processed before they're even digestible. Potatoes, beans, all the grains, in fact, cassava, leeks, like most vegetables have to be cooked before you can safely eat. Most, not all, but most have to be cooked first, because if you eat them raw, you do yourself a bit of a disservice. Like you're going to make yourself ill, and in extreme cases, you may even poison yourself. For example, potatoes, eaten raw or incorrectly prepared or stored, they build up a toxin called solanine, and solanine will kill you. In fact, fun little fact. Statistically speaking, potatoes kill more people per year globally than what sharks do. So more people die because of solanine poisoning from eating incorrectly stored or incorrectly prepared potatoes than what they do than what people die because of shark attacks. Ergo, potatoes are more dangerous than sharks. Not quite, but yeah, still. So we learned to game the system. We learned how to cook. We learned how to process. We learned how to domesticate. And we've used that and got to the point where those things are so ingrained in our culture that we think of them as the cornerstones of what our trophic level should be. We don't think of ourselves, we don't define our trophic level in terms of the function of our digestive system. So we've taken the things that we've learned to cheat, basically, and overcome limitations in our digestive system. And we're saying that we're omnivores or universal digesters because we've learned to do these things. But if we strip ourselves back to just our digestive system, well, we're obviously not. And I'm not convinced that trying to cheat your physiology, in other words, work around your digestive system, long term is a good strategy. And I think if you look around you in the world today, I think it can be safely said that it's not a good strategy. That's not working for the majority of people. The majority of people are now overweight or obese. The numbers of people that are facing metabolic dysfunction and chronic disease outcomes is skyrocketing. Chronic disease has become our top killers. Cancers, diabetes, heart disease, strokes. These are right up there in the top of the top 5 killers. We're eating in a way which isn't physiologically appropriate. And it is my position that over the long term, over sustaining that over the long term, that starts to become detrimental. It builds up. Dr. Chafee again, I'll refer back to him. He describes it as building up a toxicity, which may explain, thinking along those lines, why in my teens, as long as I did the physical work, I could eat whatever I liked. In my 20s, largely the same. Towards the end of my 20s, that started to change. By the time I had my early 30s, it was quite obvious that wasn't the case anymore. I haven't changed necessarily what I eat. I was still active. But the build-up or the cumulative effect of a misaligned dietary approach had caught up with me. Not great. So this book is my attempt to take 6, 7 years of this journey, of this learning, of this discovery, and to unpack it in a way that it is accessible to the layman, meaning someone who hasn't gone and studied nutrition, someone who doesn't want to spend 6 years trying to learn about it, but wants to spend a few weeks reading a book to gain a better understanding of what they should be eating according to their physiology. And then I'll also give a structured approach to dietary lifestyle change, because one of the things that I've learned is that human physiology does not do well with sharp, sudden, black and white, night and day type changes. For example, if you were to go from a standard Western diet, so I call it standard Western diet because it's not just a standard American diet. Our cousins across the Atlantic are not the only people facing this issue. It's a Western cultural problem. Standard Western diet filled with processed and ultra-processed garbage, just really not aligned physiologically with what your body needs. You go from eating that way and overnight change your diet, whether you're going plant-based, whether you're going carnivore, whether you're going keto, whether you're going paleo, whatever the case may be. If you just sharp, sudden, boom, overnight, completely change your diet to something else, you'll throw your system into distress and you'll end up most likely with horrible diarrhea, or alternatively with horrendous constipation. But you will end up with digestive distress and you will suffer for it. And your body will eventually adjust and come right. But you will do yourself a disservice and you will probably convince yourself because you feel so rotten that the particular way of eating that you've just given a try is obviously not for you. It doesn't work. And then you'll retreat back to your standard Western diet and your body will settle down because that's what it's used to. And that's not great. It's not that the diet was going to fail you. It's that you try to go in the deep end straight into the fire, as it were, right off the bat. And human physiology doesn't respond well to drastic overnight change. It just doesn't. It responds much better to incremental change. Small changes sustained over a long period of time that add up to be a big change, but it's the way you break it down and lay it out. And so what I did was I put together a 7-step formula to guide people from going from a standard Western diet across to a species appropriate diet, a hyper carnivore diet. And I settled on hyper carnivore because one of the things I've noticed, and I touched on this in the first episode of my podcast, interviewing the good old Martin Gillespie, is that people tend to fall into tribes, especially online. It's a weird phenomenon. We like to be very tribal, and people tend to double down on the first thing that worked for them. So you'll have people who tried paleo and had success with paleo. You'll have people who did keto and had success with keto. You have people who did animal-based, as Paul Saladino lays it out, and have had success with that. People who've done carnivore had success with that. People who've done a lion diet had success with that. People who've had a vegan diet had success with that. Everyone forms into their little tribe. And provided you've experienced some positive success or positive outcomes, you tend to become convinced that your tribe is the only tribe that can possibly be right, the only tribe that can possibly know what they're talking about. And then the infighting starts between the different little tribes. Right? Maddening, but fascinating phenomenon. And it mostly happens online. It's spectacular to watch. I noticed this, and again, I'm analytically minded. I want to understand how things work. So I try not to be closed-minded. I try not to restrict myself from considering other information. So where I came along and I was like, ketogenic diet was working for me, my initial reactions were to fall into the sort of tribal approach and like, oh no, paleo people are poisoning themselves because they're eating X, Y, and Z. That you shouldn't. Might be a higher carb content in a paleo meal than in a ketogenic meal, for example. But there were quite obviously there are people who do paleo and are thriving. Right? I see them. I'm not blind. So I started to wrestle with that. Same with keto, same with carnivore, same with lion diet, like whatever you want to, like Mediterranean, name it. There'll be people who are doing well on it. And so I looked at this and I had to wrestle with this. I was getting to the point of something, we can't all be right. Okay? From the sense of we can't all be correct in saying that our particular diet is the only one that's true or works or blah, 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 whatever the case may be. There must be something else at play here. And so I decided to strip it back and to look at human physiology and to go, okay, we know we need energy and we know we need essential nutrients. So according to the function of our digestive system itself, what should we be eating? Like that for me, that is the foundation of how to figure out what you should eat. What is your digestive system adapted and geared up for? What essential nutrients do you need? And then you find the harmony of which food sources are most nutrient dense and bioavailable. In other words, which food sources are the most densely packed with the essential nutrients that you need, macro and micro, and also at the same time are bioavailable, meaning that come in a form where your digestive system can actually extract those macro and micronutrients and put them to use without having to further convert them to try and make the stuff that you actually need. And that I'll just take a second to explain what I mean by that. So let's look at vitamin A, classic example. So it is commonly held that carrots are good for you because carrots are high in vitamin A. Now, this is true, but there's a bit of nuance here that most people are unaware of. Carrots are high in beta carotene. Beta carotene is a form of vitamin A, but it is not the form that the human body needs and can use. Human body needs retinol. Human body can only use retinol to do the function of vitamin A. It cannot use beta carotene to do the function of vitamin A. So when you eat carrots and you're getting a lot of beta carotene, what you're actually getting your body to do as part of your digestive process is to start to try and convert beta carotene into retinol, for which the conversion rate is actually pretty poor. It's not that great. So you're eating X amounts of carrots for beta carotene, but you're only getting out Y, retinol, usable vitamin A. You're losing. There's a lot of attrition in that conversion. Whereas liver, for example, beef liver, lamb's liver, is very high in retinol, not beta carotene. So when you're eating liver, for example, eating X amount of retinol, your body's using X amount of retinol. There's no conversion process necessary. Your body can extract that retinol. It's already in the usable form and can put it to use to do what it needs to do. So logically speaking, for me, I believe that the human diet, or the physiologically appropriate human diet, the one that is most likely to help us thrive, is the one which is nutrient dense, meaning packed with our essential nutrients. Essential nutrients, apologies for those who are unfamiliar, and I'll just take a second to explain this. So these are nutrients, macro and micro. So macro being protein, fats, carbohydrate, micro being vitamins and minerals. Now, essential nutrients are your essential amino acids, which is your proteins, essential fatty acids, which are your fatty acids, essential vitamins, and essential minerals. Those four categories. There are no essential carbohydrates. I don't care what the vegans say. There are no essential carbohydrates, and that includes fiber. You don't need them at all. The amount that you need to thrive, 0. So you have 4 groups of essential nutrients, which are nutrients that your body must have for you to thrive, but you must obtain them from your diet because your body cannot synthesize them either at all or at least not in adequate quantities to meet your needs. So essential nutrients have to be obtained from the diet, and they are a very specific group, the ones that we have to have in order to thrive. Now, the appropriate human diet is the one that caters for those essential nutrients in the most nutrient-dense and bioavailable form. That just makes logical sense to me, and I'm hoping it makes logical sense to you as well. You don't want to be eating something that your body then has to try and convert into something else before it can actually use it. You want to be eating the stuff that comes pre-packed, ready to go. You want to get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. And that is unequivocally animal meat, animal fats, and animal products. That is just the plain cold fact. Animal sources of food are more nutrient dense and more bioavailable to the human digestive system compared to plant foods. Bottom. You have to do a lot less to them to make them digestible. In fact, the only thing you have to really do is, and again, that's not even a have to, but you cook them to neutralize pathogens. You don't cook them to make them digestible. They're already digestible, but you cook them to neutralize pathogens, and because it just probably tastes better. That being said, I do enjoy lamb's liver raw. It's sweet and it's quite delicious. But plants, on the other hand, you cook to make them digestible, because the majority of them you can't digest if you haven't cooked them first. It's just how it is. So you're a hypercarnivore according to the function of your digestive system. And I lay that out in this book as best I can. And I start by describing the problem that Western society faces, because if you don't understand that there's a problem to begin with, then you're not looking for a solution, are you? So for those who recognize that something is off, something is wrong, we're being failed by what we're being told to eat in the mainstream, then this is the book for you. This will explain to you why we're facing this problem, the impact of the problem. For example, if we look at the top 5 causes of death in the United States in 2019, and I'm looking at data from our Wilden data, I'll just show it to you there. There it is. The top cause of death was cardiovascular diseases, chronic disease, cancers, chronic disease, respiratory diseases. So, okay, there's an infectious disease. Dementia, chronic disease, digestive diseases, chronic disease. So 4 out of the top 5 chronic diseases, lifestyle diseases, preventable diseases. And that'll upset a few people, but I just want to add a very, very necessary bit of nuance there. There may very well be a genetic component to a chronic disease. Let's take cancer, for instance. There are genetic components which predispose people to certain types of cancer. So, for example, both my grandfather and my father are both prostate cancer survivors. Yeah. So prostate cancers are quite common, but there's something in my direct family gene line where that is prevalent. So, genetically speaking, I am probably more predisposed than average to prostate cancer. However, where genes may load the gun, you need something else to pull the trigger. That may be lifestyle. That may be environment. There may be other factors, but you need something to pull that trigger. So a great strategy is to take the areas that you can control. Lifestyle is generally one of them, and structure your lifestyle such that you minimize the risk of that particular negative outcome. You minimize the chance of that trigger being pulled. Right? So I lay out the impact that we're having because I want people to understand the magnitude. I lay out what metabolic health is. And I'm quite proud of the definition that I arrived on. Because if you were just to jump online and try to find what metabolic health is, it's rather ambiguous, to say the least. Quite ambiguous. There will be definitions that talk about specific biomarkers. There will be definitions that are quite airy-fairy. So I sort of took a step back and I said, okay, well, if I was going to try and define this, let's look at the terms and start individually. So we take the word metabolism, from which the term metabolic is derived. And the word metabolism is defined in biology. Remember, we're talking biology here, so it's best to grab a biology textbook if you want to define terms. So in the biology textbooks, metabolism is defined as the sum of the chemical reactions that take place within each cell of a living organism and that provide energy for vital processes and for synthesizing new organic material. So that is the biological definition of metabolism. So the term metabolic, which is a derivative of that, is defined again in the biology textbooks as having to do with metabolism, the total of all chemical changes that take place in the cell of an organism to produce energy and basic materials needed for important life processes. So we're talking about the inner workings of the cell, and the cell being able to do what it needs to do, producing energy and producing new organic material for the functioning of the systems which that cell is part of. Then we take the word health, and we have a look at the definition again, looking at biology. And the term health is defined in human beings as being the extent of an individual's continuing physical, emotional, mental, and social ability to cope with his or her environment. So I like that. And then I put them together. And so the way I define metabolic health and the way I'd like you to think about your metabolic health is it is your body's ability to generate and process the energy and basic organic materials needed to facilitate the proper functioning of your bodily systems as required for critical life processes which are essential not only to sustaining your life, but also enabling your continued physical, emotional, mental, and social ability to cope within your environment. So if you're thinking about metabolic health through that lens, what I then do with the book is lay out my case, articulate it as best I can for what you should be eating according to your physiology, according to what your digestive system is adapted for, and why that is the case. And then I provide a framework, a 7-step framework to guide you through undertaking a nutritional lifestyle change, to take you from eating standard Western diet and shift you across to eating a species appropriate diet. And do it in incremental stages, sustainably, so that A, you're not overwhelming your system or yourself by trying to jump off the deep end and finding it's a bit too much and you're not coping well with it, and blah, blah, blah. And B, so that people can find their happy place along the way, those small incremental goals, small incremental victories along the way that over time add up to be big wins. That's the approach I've taken. So that's Conquering King's Stomach. Thank you for hearing me out. It is the first of many books to come. And I started with nutrition because nutrition is the thing that led me to start to experience and understand and appreciate metabolic health. But my understanding has grown. And I used the example of the tribes with their different nutritional leaning and they're infighting. The other thing I've come to appreciate is that metabolic health is not just about nutrition. Nutrition is, in fact, one of 5 key inputs for metabolic health. And I define them as 5 because there's 5 that I believe are what you would call ancestrally appropriate. 5 lifestyle factors that have been with human beings since time immemorial. And these 5 are nutrition, very cornerstone of metabolic health. But then you've also got movement or exercise, physical activity, sleep, light environment or light exposure, and grounding, being electrically earthed. These are 5 things that up until the last 100 to 150 years were part and parcel of normal everyday life. And that had been the case all the way to where our species first appeared. And they are so influential that we can actually measure how they work as triggers and modulators of cellular level activity within us. So we're talking about metabolic health. We're talking about your health at the level of the very cell and the functioning of the cell. Well, we can look at nutrition. We can look at exercise, or physical activity. We can look at sleep. We can look at light environment or light exposure. And we can look at grounding. And we can measure what that is doing in our cells and how that triggers certain cascades of chemical reactions or triggers an inflammatory or an anti-inflammatory cascade. It does different things, all involved in our metabolic health, all involved in our well-being. So I've come to appreciate that, again, wanting to avoid falling into this tribe versus tribe sort of online nonsense. I've come up with what I call the 5 pillars of metabolic health. It's these 5 lifestyle factors that I believe are intrinsically linked to each other because they interplay. For example, if you're not eating right, you're not training right, you're not sleeping right. Similarly, if you're not getting the right sort of light environment, that can affect your sleep. It sets off it offsets your circadian rhythm. Things will be out of whack. Like, these things are intrinsically linked. They're not isolated. They're not siloed. They all interplay with and on each other. And so I've moved beyond just nutrition, and I've settled on wanting to help people improve their metabolic health. And the mountain on which I've planted my flag is the 5 pillars of metabolic health. And I'm busy working on my second book, which unpacks all 5 in such a way as to help people understand why they're important, what they do for us in terms of acting as triggers and modulators of metabolic health, of cellular function, in other words. and then how to incorporate them into your lifestyle. And in today's modern age, which is so convenience focused, it's actually scary. How to understand how to craft your lifestyle such that you are making daily investments into each of the 5 pillars, because that will yield over time the optimal or the best possible health span that you could have across your lifespan. So that's a work in progress, and we will get there. But up next for the deep dive series, I'm going to be working with a man I think is particularly brilliant, Mr. Roderick Lambert, and I'm going to let him do a short sort of mini series of 4, maybe 5 episodes, deep diving into the topics that he finds fascinating and that he uses with great effect to help his clients improve their health. And we'll really get into the nitty-gritty, the detail of each individual topic, and provide all the sort of studies and the correct references to back up what's being said. And I'm quite looking forward to recording and releasing that series with him. So please watch the space. It'll come out on Thursdays. So episode 1 with Roderick will come out next week, Thursday, which is going to be...
Given you've made it this far into the episode, I can only assume that human metabolic health is a subject you find fascinating and engaging, and it resonates with you, and that's absolutely awesome because we're very much alike in that regard. And because of that, I want to take a moment to talk to you about potentially becoming a Zinzino independent partner in the same way that I have. You see, Zinzino have tremendous opportunities available for independent partners, meaning people who decide that they don't just want to be a customer, but instead want to use the concept of test-based personalized nutrition to benefit their own health, to take the guesswork out of their own health journeys in the same way that I have, but then to build that user story, to build that testimony of the difference that that's made in our health journeys, and use that to market Zinzino's product, to market the concept of test-based personalized nutrition in the exact way that I'm busy doing right now, and bring on board other customers and other partners to grow the distribution network. And in doing so, you get handsomely rewarded through their compensation scheme, which is one of the best that I've seen in the industry. So if you'd like to explore setting up a side revenue, whether it be something that you only do a couple hours a week or something that you put a little bit more effort into and build into a full-fledged career, or anything in between, get in touch and let's have a talk about the opportunity and how this might be the right fit for you, not only to take the guesswork out of your personal health journey, but to also build you additional income streams that help to improve your financial situation and the possibilities for you and your family.
The 10th of April. And yeah, looking forward to doing that. So just as I end off, for those who are looking for a copy of Conquering King's Stomach, it's available in Kindle and paperback forms. You can find it on Amazon. Quite a unique name, Conquering King's Stomach. There's only one. So yeah, have a look around. You can find it on Amazon. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Hey folks, thank you for joining us for today's episode. If you found this discussion useful and informative, please be sure to give the channel a like, and please also subscribe so that you may stay up to date with upcoming episodes and exclusive content as and when they are released. Just a reminder that this podcast is made possible thanks to my work as a Zinzino independent partner and Zinzino's brilliant test-based personalized nutrition concept. If you feel like you would like to know more about Zinzino's product offering, or you are interested in potentially joining me as an independent partner yourself, you will find a survey linked in the episode description. Please feel free to complete this survey. It only takes a minute, and in return I will provide you with a personalized product recommendation, and I will also personally reach out to you to see if there's any questions or queries I can answer. Thanks again, and looking forward to having you back soon.